Today on the podcast, I'm discussing one of my favorite, most insightful, yet most difficult to stick to topics: growing slowly. Now, let me give this a little bit of clarity because I say favorite now. It's taken me a few years to really appreciate the necessity that is slow growth. Because just like many of you might be feeling, I'm most definitely over here on the other side of the microphone, wishing to kick things off with a big old bang and be able to have a large enough audience or a large enough Instagram following or a large enough email list or whatever else it is that will sustain the business so that I can ignore everything else and only do what I love the most. Right? I mean, I've been there before. 12 years ago, when I was working 2 part-time jobs while starting my photography business, I wanted nothing more than to, using air quotes over here, be full-time. As if having another income source somehow lessened the photography skills that I was bringing for my clients. Saying that out loud now kind of sounds dumb, but in the moment, it was true, in my brain at least. I only felt legitimate once I had quit everything else and was solely relying on myself and my craft to bring in the revenue to pay the bills. But, my friends, if I could do it all over again, the one thing I would do would be to slow down my rush to be full-time. Why? Because the creative freedom available to you when you are not yet reliant on selling what you make to make a living is an amazingly unique position. As you will soon hear from this week's guest, Ricky Blanding, growing slowly allows you to explore different styles and approaches. It allows you to consider the feedback you receive from people interacting with your work and be intentional about deciding what things you want to change, rather than only making decisions based on the very real need of making sure you can pay the bills. I say all of this before we dive into this week's chat because I've been on every side of it, and my perspective now has been hard learned. I just wanted to remind you all that I've been there. So if you need support or are looking for more help, remember I'm only an email away. You can always send a message to Rebecca@makers-playbook.com or a DM on Instagram, might be a lot easier to remember, at the Makers Playbook, and I'll gladly be there. And I do have a little bit more time these days to make sure that the inbox gets responded to faster, thanks to the editing help I now have for the podcast, which is thanks to our amazing sponsor, Amico. You may have noticed that Amico isn't taking direct orders on their website currently. And while that might seem like a bad thing, the reason for it is pretty awesome. For the past 8 months, Amico has been focusing on supplying their distributors first. In other words, they're focused on making sure your favorite local shops are supported before even their own website. And you can easily pick up your favorite glazes like Potter's Choice Honey Flux or Rainforest Celadon on the shelf of your local clay shop and avoid extra shipping costs. Naturally, high demand and supply issues have made it hard to keep stores stocked these days, but Amico is dedicated to supporting your favorite small business first, now and in the future. And that, my friends, is putting your money where your values are. And you know I'm all about that. If you don't yet have a favorite local shop, you can find an Amico distributor near you by visiting amico.com/dealers. A huge thanks to the team at Amico for supporting the Makers Playbook podcast. All right, my friends, enough from me. We have a great chat today with Ricky Blanding on the podcast. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Makers Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikes-Kara. Hey, Ricky, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Let's just get right to it before I get carried away talking about this phase that you are in with ceramics right now. For people who don't know who I'm talking to, how would you introduce yourself?
My name is Ricky Blanding. I am the founder and owner of Ricky Blanding Ceramics, which is a small batch pottery and commission studio, if you will. I've been doing ceramics for about 15 years, but just recently in 2020 decided to establish an LLC and really see how to brand and how to take this forward.
I love that you already established an LLC. I wasn't planning on talking about like the paperwork legality of business, but now that just opens up a whole nother conversation. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Deciding to do that, what kind of shifted with that? That is a lot of paperwork, right? That takes a big step to say, oh, I'm going to intentionally create this company in this way, as opposed to sole prop. And also, caveat for everyone, we are not lawyers, we are not giving business legal advice, consult professionals.
For me, I think it was just, you know, doing this for so many years, kind of like an under the table basis. People say, oh, they know that I'm doing this kind of work and there is a monetary exchange, but I just wanted more of a face and more of an entry point and an access point for people to really understand what I was offering and not so much on a one-on-one basis, something that I really was giving myself in these works. And it allowed me to start making some of those bigger choices about what I was able to provide on a consistent basis versus providing whatever I was learning at that time, which for some people, they really want to see that type of progress. But for other people, they'd rather see a more branded, packaged product when it comes to small batch pottery.
Was there kind of a shift also in what you were offering as far as like selling one-off pieces at markets versus trying to partner with wholesale clients or big production or I'm getting kind of that different approach. Does that open up things or that's my brain?
I think that it was the choice to start doing production work. And just to backtrack, I fell in love with ceramics. I fell in love with clay, and pottery is still clay and it's still ceramics, but it's a certain type. Starting up Ricky Blending Ceramics was a way for me to pay homage to the ceramic side of things while still doing production pottery, utility wear. So when I started the LLC, that's when I started to say, okay, this is what my dish set looks like. These are the products that I do offer. These are the products that I don't offer. This is the range of shapes, sizes, and glazes and price range, and really try to get some barriers around what I was actually offering. I love to say yes, and I love a challenge and think with other creatives. But when it comes to offering a product, there has to be boundaries. Starting the LLC was my choice to put boundaries around what I do.
Oh, I think that's so smart. So smart. I'm experiencing that personally on our end. Like Francesco has always had that mentality coming into it as a professional potter. But I was kind of like, well, if somebody asks to make this, that sounds fun. Let me figure it out. But then realizing the amount of mental capacity it takes to experiment with a new form and test out a new shape. And especially when you're doing functional wear, like I think we all are, what's the ergonomics of that? Okay, it looks pretty, but what's the function of it? Does it fit in a dishwasher? Does it feel good in your hands? Like all of these things take months to ideate, right? And that's not a sustainable business model.
Exactly. You just brought up an example in my head. A woman, she came to one of my pop-ups at West Elm, and I had my mugs out and we were talking about my mugs. And she says, oh, these are really pretty. And she's showing her husband, don't you like these mugs? And, seemingly a good atmosphere. And then she flips the script and she says, why do your handles look like this? And I said, well, what do you mean? And she says, well, I just think that they're not really easy to use. And at that moment, I knew that I had the choice to either defend my work and defend the 15 years of experience that I have in this, or listen to her as a newcomer, listen to her as somebody who is brand new to what I do, completely does not know about pottery. What is a mug to her? Because that's a valuable perspective, right? And so the next round of works that I did with mugs, I considered what she said, and I intentionally put mugs that had handles that were made for 3 fingers and handles that were made for all of them, just to kind of like experiment with that. I don't know if this answers your question or if it's like a total tangent, but I try to use my pop-ups and any customer interaction as a way to like direct what I'm making and direct that creativity. And to expand on what you were saying earlier also was that when you have these creative possibilities and there's so many directions that you can go in, you can go in that direction, but it takes a certain amount of energy. So having this business was a reason for me to kind of like delegate the amount of energy and time that I had into something that was a good deliverable over time and sustainable.
Oh my gosh. That's so insightful and wise. And I know you're saying you've worked in pottery for 15 years, but I'm also looking at you like, so did you start when you were 5? We're going to need to talk about my skincare routine after this because I thought you were 10 years younger than me. And that's different. I'm going to stay in my lane on this podcast and we'll talk about that offline later. But that is so insightful around, a lot of us get into it just saying, oh, I love to do this and I want to do more of this. I want to have my hands in clay more often. How do I do that? But you've really looked at this from the get go of what actually makes it sustainable, what actually makes it viable, and starting to build it from there. I know you've probably been selling for longer than that, but as far as like making this more into a very structured business to say, this is what keeps this going, this is how this works. And what I also heard in your interaction with the woman at the pop up is a very nuanced approach to being open to receiving feedback, right? I think makers say, like, well, just make what you want to make and then figure out how to sell it afterwards. But when you are selling functional wear, there are some very reasonable feedback loops that you get that's like, well, we can't just totally toss non potters under the bus and be like, ah, you're just not my audience. At the same time, you don't want to change your style and everything you do just for Joe Schmo down the street. But what I'm hearing is this very nuanced balance of like, well, okay, she kind of had a point. How can I intertwine that into my own making practice? Does that track?
Totally. Like I said, when you're making functional wear, it's functional because it's for not just your own artistic beliefs and needs. It's for someone to use. And there are parameters around what use is. It has to hold water. You ideally, coffee happens at a restful time of the day. It's a time where you're trying to gather yourself. So that hold needs to be comfortable. There's just some natural parameters. And I think when you're starting any type of business, market research is really important. Become aware of what the need is for what you're making, what you're offering. And a lot of times potters or ceramic artists are like, okay, I'm going to sell what I love and what I make. And they're selling the idea as opposed to being open to learning again and rediscovering what it means to somebody else. When I start to scale and when I really sink my roots into this, I do plan to do more personal, put more of Ricky Blanding into the work that I do. There's definitely a lot more that I understand about this craft that I haven't really had a chance to put into the works. But right now, it really is a lot of market research. I'm looking at who's picking up what on my pop-up stand. I'm looking at what demographics are stopping at my stand. What colors and patterns are they attracted to? All of this is going to help me to meet them in the middle of my creativity and their need.
Oh, I love that. I love the idea of meeting in the middle. Oh, that's all right. Well, I just found the title of this episode. I think where we're going. To give people a little bit of context, since we're talking about pop-ups, we're talking about meeting people in person. Where are you in the world? What's kind of day to day? What's life, the reality of life look like for you?
So for me, what I do is every day, usually I'm at the studio. I work out of a studio called Sugar Hill Clay in Midtown Detroit. And it's a community studio where I also instruct, but the certain members have the ability to come in 24/7 and make work. So that is where I'm working out of. Have kind of a personal quota for the amount of work I want to make finished, past quality standards, ready to be sold per month. And with those works, I try to aim for like a pop-up a month. Sometimes it's more, but it usually ends around a pop-up a month when I'm truly in the rut of making work. Those pop-ups are usually at West Elm in Birmingham, Michigan for all of my out-of-state viewers.
This is the point where we bring the hand up and say, we are here. And
So Michigan, I don't know how this is reflecting right now, but Detroit is about right here, I believe. And Birmingham is probably 25 minutes away north. So yeah, I'm doing those pop-ups. And from those first couple pop-ups, I started to make connections with interior designers or people with other pop-up platforms or other people in my more immediate neighborhood in Detroit. And there's a big openness to accepting small businesses at many levels, especially at this very volatile beginning point. And accepting who I was in this right now and knowing what I can and can't do and communicating that in all honesty is what has opened the door for other opportunities with business owners that have a brick and mortar or have another platform that will allow me to put my work out there again and learn more.
that's amazing. What I'm hearing too is the idea around using the pop up. You're not just thinking of it as is the value there in terms of how much you sold in that one day, but it's really like a zero cost, if you will. I mean, obviously there's your time, and I don't know how it works with West Elm and whatnot, but that is your market research, right? Historically, somebody would have had to pay a firm to go out and have groups of people come in and you interview them and you get feedback, and you're able to do this with the cost of your time, yes, but then, maybe you are able to sell a few pieces, but actually the value you're getting out of it is a much longer arc that you're thinking ahead on.
Yes. And as I start to sink more roots into this, I will be able to invest in more streamlined methods of market research. Right now, I've accepted where I am, accepted the amount of energy I can put into the studio actually making work. And I'm getting more comfortable with the payoff of that work. What is the financial gain from the amount that I'm able to give to this? What I'm learning from those moments, is it worth my time? And I've kind of signed myself up for a long haul here with this. I understand that beyond being dedicated, I'm not chasing a carrot right now. I'm really in this to learn. I'm really in this to understand what it means to sell, because quiet as kept, I'm not a salesman like that. Maybe it's somewhere in me, but like that's not me. I'm an artist and I want to connect with people who appreciate what I'm putting out. So learning is more than just what a paper can deliver to me. It's actually physically being in uncomfortable conversations, you know, doing that, just doing it.
And I think sales get a bad rep. Like being curious about people and wanting to tell them about your art is sales at the end of the day. It doesn't have to feel like this is where I get on my little bit of a soapbox. Like it doesn't have to feel the way it feels when you walk into a car dealership, right? And you're like, I am being sold to, right? I think with any kind of responsibility, technology, anything, like you've got the good and you've got the bad, right? You've got the benefits of the internet and the bad sides of the internet. And you've got like with great response, what is that? With great power comes great responsibility, right? And so it's like you can use it in a good way to help someone find something that they're really going to love in their everyday life and make their morning routine more enjoyable. Or you can be slimy and sell something that isn't worthwhile. Well, walk us back a little bit because we keep talking about like when you get your teeth in here a little bit more, when you start, when you're able to do more. But at the same time, the conversation I'm hearing is like a very insightful approach to where I'm like, you're kind of in there already from the outside looking in. I'm like, we're talking about like it's just barely getting off the ground, but I'm like, you're there. But maybe I don't know if it doesn't feel like that because you're having to work another job and squeeze studio time in between, or what's kind of that practical reality.
So that practical reality, you're right about that. I also run a composting nonprofit, Scrap Soils. And my time is split between those two endeavors and along with other things as well. So pottery is the way that I make money, but I definitely have other responsibilities. And I don't think so much that the other responsibilities hinder me from sinking my teeth further into Ricky Blending ceramics. I think it's honestly a matter of access to adequate studio space for the scale of production that I'm capable of doing right now. I went through some hardships and I decided to move to Georgia for a while. So I was there for a short while, which meant that I gave up everything in Michigan. I gave up my studio space. I had 2,500 square feet of studio space that was essentially gifted to me. I had just bought a new kiln. I had another kiln donated to me. I had a lot, and everything was plugged up, ready to go. And then I went through my thing and I called myself like fighting for Ricky before anything else. But looking back, I wish that I would have done the wise thing and just kind of waited. But where that puts me now is fortunately I have access to a kiln, but my personal kiln that I invested in is waiting for me to be able to plug it up at my next studio space. So just some of the benefits of like scale and like shorter lead times on special commission projects, those types of things I haven't really been able to grab right now, but I'm working on that. And I know that I can do it once I will get it. I'm not worried about it, but I understand that's been a limit for me lately.
This has been my big learning curve of, Francesco and I trying to get our ceramic site off the ground is just how long and how much time it does take to get things going, right? Because for one, I'm impatient as hell. So that's part of the problem. But, with me getting a photography business off the ground, it was like have decent gear, didn't even have to have the top of the line stuff, but 12 years ago, have decent gear, have a computer at the time, start a Facebook page because Instagram didn't exist, maybe get a website up there. And I was good to go. I could start booking people and rock and roll. Whereas ceramics has so many resource demands as far as physical space. Like you're saying, working at a production level, that's exactly why we had to move out, not had to, we chose to move out of Chicago to a city where we could have our own space, where we could set up our own studio, because working out of a community space, rather, when you have that production capability, community spaces aren't set up for that. Like they're set up to give you like one shelf that you're sharing. You're not putting an entire order of plates in one kiln.
Right. And I guess I'm fortunate in that way because I've been with the studio for going on 5 years, something around there. And by instructing there, I do have access to kiln space. A certain amount of times a week, I'll be able to fill up a kiln. If I have a big need, I'll say, hey, you guys, I got this commission. I really need to finish these works. And they'll be able to put them in for me. The student's work is always priority. And when I have a pop up and people see what I have available, that's a very different representation from what I would like to make with more testing time and more firing time. So the access to kiln time and space is directly related to the types of works that are on my standard available. Missions get it a little special. They have it made a little bit because I black out specific time for that. Inventory kind of goes on a halt and I focus on that commission. So I go through all of the necessary testing for glaze and clay body fit and all of these things. So I get to see more breadth of my creativity in those types of partnerships. Whereas with inventory, I'm more focused on, again, that utility, really being able to deliver something that's functional, doesn't have defects, something that looks consistent on the table, work that speaks for itself to a larger demographic.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to talking about how you're managing commissions because I think a lot of makers hear that word. Like the first thing you see in so many bios is no commissions, no DMs for direct, like that's like straight out the gate. And I'm like, let's talk about this a little bit. But before we get to that, I don't want to gloss over the fact that you said you are running a nonprofit. That is a big deal. And also said, that ceramics is the financial support and not running a nonprofit. And I'm like, hold up a second. Like from a workload standpoint, this is why we connected so easily because we are both doing multiple full-time things at the same time.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. That's the thing. It's like, we can't, unless there are adequate resources to help you live a happy, complete, your needs are met life, then you can go ahead and spread yourself across the 2 or 3 or however many platforms. But I think when you're being ambitious and when you know that there's juice somewhere around you, you just start tapping all the trees and you're just like, where's the juice? Right. So for me, it's where I am. My team with Scrap Soils has really helped me to realize that just because I started a business, which is essentially like having a child, just because I started that business, it doesn't mean that it has to take off immediately or that it has to take off in the first month. I, over the years, have really become comfortable with like slow growth, but honest growth and transparency and holding myself, my partners accountable in the business. So as that relates to pottery, those skills honestly have transferred over to the pottery side of things. Also with pottery, it's different because Scrap Soils is a composting nonprofit. So we collect residential food waste and we turn it into compost. That's something that everybody needs. It's a very pressing part of our world right now. Whereas pottery is not as high on the demand list. The people who need pottery, they need it for a different reason. And I know that in the future, I will be more active in both roles, but also I'll understand how much time I need to actually see those different pursuits forward.
When did you start Scrap Soils? Because I'm also like, I know that this is mostly a maker's podcast, but I'm also like, peeps a mug. I've got to like intentionally record a section with the mug. I'm going to get sidetracked. Focus. The thing that I was interested in having these conversations is having the more rounded of who you are as a whole human and what life looks like in its whole and how pottery works within that, as opposed to just like, okay, we're only going to talk about what happens when clay spins on a wheel, for example. So tell us a little bit about like, let's chat Scrap Soils for a little bit. Like, when did you start that and what's the scope? How big are we talking here? Because you mentioned a team.
So Scrap Soil started March of 2020. And I love to garden because my grandpa, he was really big into gardening. And when he passed, I gardened to be closer to him and also just because it's an awesome thing to do. And I ended up getting a bigger garden. It was like a 12 by 12 foot plot. And it was just enough space for me to really dig in and learn. And during that time, I noticed that I wasn't able to eat all the food that I was giving away or eating myself. And I had a lot of waste. And I then learned about composting and then became privy to the reality around food waste in the world. Started collecting scraps from my job at the time. I was a server. Went to my full-time job. Also, I was at a place called Pewabic Pottery in Detroit as a fabrication artist and just was trying to save the world, right? And one of my high school friends, he started multiple businesses and I asked him for advice and he brought in another one of our friends and we started this business. Since then, we've collected 52,000 pounds of food waste and we have composted all of this food waste. Currently, we've interrupted service so that we can focus on fundraising. We are looking forward to expanding our team really soon here. We have a really great candidate and just trying to learn what it means to apply for grants and learn what it means to make partnerships across a business community. That's another thing that kind of transfers over to pottery is that it's not just you in the studio pounding out work. It's not just us in meetings together figuring things out. You know, even if you are in a more competitive field like pottery, I say competitive very loosely, but you know, it could be a little territorial in that way. It's still necessary for you to get out there and connect with the other potters, the other compost companies and what have you. And a lot of our growth came after we made those connections and started to learn from some of the lessons that they learned and teach them something. Currently, we've worked with University of Michigan and are soon hopefully going to be working with the state of Michigan to train us to expand into our next level of waste collection.
NBD, like, really glad I asked the question. That's huge.
Thank you. Thank you. We're really, really excited. We're really excited.
Amazing.
So follow Scraps and Rolls. I'll send you that Instagram as well.
And we will add the link in the show notes for everybody. For people that don't remember where show notes are, it's all on the website, makersplaybook.com/podcast. That's incredible. Also, in that, you mentioned being a fabrication artist. So now we've got to dig back through the ceramics history here. Because now I'm like, there's a whole nother level of Ricky Blanding ceramics that's been like held back that I'm like, hold the phone. We've got, so I'm assuming just based on some basic math, you said you've been in it for 15 years. So I'm guessing you got introduced in high school. Walk us through that trajectory then.
Okay. So in high school, I was a junior. I was in the sophomore year, beginning of junior year, somewhere in there, and went to Lasser High School, amazing art department. I was taking the tour around the artist department and they took us to like the computer graphic room. And in the back of it, there was a super dingy, dirty door. It was just like a big metal 80s art door. And I'm like, what's back there? And she goes, well, go look. And I open it up and it is the ceramics department. And I remember falling in love. Like I fell in love at that moment. And I said, I will be in this room. And from that point on, my teacher, Mrs. York, shout out Mrs. York. We love you. Anybody looking at this, and I love you. But yeah, she just was really honest with me about what the medium was and what the possibilities were around it, and really supportive of me when it came to applying for different awards and what have you. I then went to Kansas City Art Institute for my foundations year, and that was a great experience. Worked with Russell Ferguson and Brett Reef, was doing a little bit of large scale installation, worked with Amy Myers, Amy Myers is a very important role model to me. Yeah, worked with these amazing artists and ended up leaving Kansas City Art Institute because I felt they weren't teaching me business hard skills. I felt like there was more for me to learn outside of school than there was inside. So came back to Michigan and started to go to community college for a different degree. But at that same time, immediately started instructing ceramics. So for a while, I was teaching ceramics classes in Royal Oak, building ceramics classes, ended up building an intermediate course for some of my students that had been through the beginners for a while, and just really got familiar with not only how to instruct, but learning from my students, all these different ways to approach this medium, you know. And I think the years teaching really helped me to not only become a better potter, but also taught me different ways to approach because there were different ways I had to problem solve. When somebody's piece broke on the wheel, they want to walk away with something. So I have to figure out how to fix that piece, right? And from there, I started working for Pewabic. Pewabic is a centuries old institution around ceramics and pottery and really, really central to the ceramics community in America. And I was really proud to get that position. I started working in the pottery house, the firehouse, and making petite vases, which was really awesome because most of their other items, very strict parameters around what the size and the shape is. The petite vases, we were allowed to just make something that was a certain weight and pretty much go to town. And so I got to put a lot of my artistry into that. Worked in tile pressing also, where I worked with, just various levels of fabrication artists to create architectural and commemorative tile. I even got the chance to work with admin on certain levels to do anything from staff development and really raising awareness around certain core issues within the work environment for Poabic, all the way to product development to impart different modern and current ideas into some of their commemorative tiles. So yeah, Poabic was a really special experience. And after leaving Poabic, that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to invest in the things that I really care about, the things that when I go to sleep at night and I ask myself, what did you do with your life? What are you doing? I'm thinking about these endeavors. And so, yeah, that's where I am now.
It's amazing. It sounds like Boambic was the business real life instruction that you were looking for when you left traditional schooling.
Poabic had a big role to play in my understanding of what a full-time job means. It definitely taught me some of not only the lingo, because that is a very big part of it, but it taught me what types of things people deal with when they're dealing with a full-time job. They're trying to weigh out benefits versus pay versus time versus their own ambitions. All of those things, it's a battle that we all shared together because we all had our own ambitions, and we all wanted to make enough money to really have the life we wanted. And so, yeah, it was a really great learning ground, and they were beyond supportive of me. I got the chance to go on the news a couple times and represent the works. I got the chance just to be alive in the ceramics world for a second. I think that my family is where I got my business understanding and my strive to move forward with the nonprofit or Ricky Blending Ceramics. My mom I love you, mom, but she definitely taught me how to do some of the more like paperworky type things and lay the foundation for owning a business.
Does anybody own their own business as, I go very literally as an example of like, oh, someone in your family must be self-employed, but that's not always, sometimes it's not so direct in those examples, I find.
Yeah. No, my mom, she has over the years started many businesses. She used to do real estate. I believe at one time she was a broker. She has written books. She's traveled around the world and done inspirational speaking. And she's been on various platforms for self-help and life betterment. And yeah, she just kind of does a lot of stuff. So shout out Princess, and you can look her up under the tagline, transformation, it is so.
Awesome. Amazing. And I think examples like that are sometimes hard to come by because I also love my parents. What I'm about to say is not going to surprise them, but don't want them to feel bad. I grew up around the exact same job my whole life. They never really switched jobs. And so then the idea of switching or changing or trying something new can sometimes feel really scary without that example of your mom alongside you to be like, oh, well, she's okay. Everything turned out fine. Like she worked her way from one thing to the next and figured it out. Marie Forleo says everything is figure-outable, right? Which is sometimes hard to remember. In the world, some people would think, oh gosh, you go work for Poabic, you stay there, you've got all the benefits, it's secure, it's safe. Why would you ever leave that, right? That's the vision sometimes in the US and capitalism, and that's a whole nother conversation.
Totally. I mean, I think that it takes a certain type of person to realize that a full-time job does not mean a lifestyle. You don't necessarily even need to be ambitious to understand that. You just need to look in you and ask yourself, is this what I have been working on this whole time? Is this my ultimate expression? If there's space to move up in a full-time job and express more of who you are and showcase more of your hard skills, then great, go ahead and do that. But I just felt like the things that I wanted, I would not have enough time to work that job as well as do the things that I wanted. And also in full transparency, I went through my hardships. I definitely had to take some time off of work to focus on myself and just kind of focus on me because I was getting burnt out, and the fragility that I experienced during that time and the amount of care that I needed to put into myself was a little bit arresting. And it showed me that either I'm going to give all of my time and energy to another institution, albeit amazing. And I'm in full support of Poabic. I thank them for everything that they've done for me, but I needed more. I needed more, and I needed more freedom and flexibility to get that more in my own way. And so that's why I decided that it's best to do Ricky Blending Ceramics.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Well, as far as the vision and the dream of Ricky Blending Ceramics, we kicked off just diving straight into talking about the market research and the when you get to this place or have a studio or resources, what is the dream? What are we working towards? What's the vision?
So the vision is to have a small batch pottery studio. I'd like to create seasonal works around my normal base collection, as well as continuing to do commissions. I think commissions keep me fresh. It keeps me collaborating in all of this, but I definitely want to have kind of a catalog of my pottery over time. I would like to have my own studio. I will actually have my own studio. And I'd like that to also be a showroom where I also do architectural tile that might expand into some level of I dare say gallery space, but somewhere where I can represent other small batch potteries and kind of offer a platform for other artists like myself to sell their works as well. That's kind of where I'm looking to go. And it's amazing because I see how it could happen right now. Like the types of commissions that I've had, I have a wholesale offer right now. They're waiting to work with me and it's literally on pause until I get my studio. So the difficulty is, again, is not getting the opportunities. It's being able to be ready for them when they come, you know? So
Ooh.
I'm just riding the wave.
Which is a completely different perspective than I hear most people on the internet shouting about, right? Most people are, nobody sees my stuff anymore. I can't reach people. For lack of a better phrase, a very victim mentality of like, the world is happening to me and I can't do what I want. And here you're able to put a completely different perspective to say, like, the opportunities are there. I just need to be able to get the resources to fill them, basically.
Exactly. Exactly. I have so many people who are in support of what I do and they vocalize that and everything. I even have a select 2 people, I won't mention them, but I have 2 people who are constantly at every single one of my pop-ups. Whether or not they buy anything, they found it important to come. And little pieces of gas like that, it's just like, yes, like I'm doing this. And I think it does take a special person to do pottery in this way because it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of believing that your work can sell itself and that your work has a demographic that has people who are specifically interested in that. You have to kind of put blinders on. You have to not think about all of these, even sometimes moments where your work isn't getting a lot of visibility or that new store revamp you did not get as many likes. You have to know that you did that because it was the next step for you and you stay consistent. And when somebody comes to you 3 years from now and looks at your track record, they're going to want to see that level of constant engagement, consistency, and that growth. So what if it's not popular and catching financial traction? Keep doing it.
Amen. Oh my gosh. I wanted to circle back to commissions, but I also almost just want to like mic drop right there. Like, just keep at it. And that does come full circle with what you were saying in the beginning in terms of being able to be focused on the long game and the slow, authentic, consistent growth as opposed to the flashy, oh, I posted a reel yesterday and got 30,000 views.
Mhm.
Woo!
Yeah, like people can't relate to that. It just is really shiny. It looks beautiful. It's awesome. And I'm not knocking somebody who totally made it in a short time span. That's awesome. There's an intimacy that comes along with seeing someone come up in a grassroots kind of way. And not that I would choose that amongst blowing up out of nowhere, but where I am right now.
Both and we can go with both things being true. Like, that would be nice.
But yeah, but even if I were to completely just get a whole bunch of startup capital and just really go that way, I don't want to alienate people from being able to access what I'm doing and access the process. There's a connection there that I really, really believe in. So yeah, definitely. I'm just, like I said, I'm literally along for the ride. And another thing I'm noticing is that other potters who haven't started an LLC or don't consider themselves a brand yet, I can tell that they want to be, but they're not yet, is a victim mentality around it. Well, oh, my work isn't as good as yours. Oh, I don't have as many followers on Instagram. There's all of these tropes that are just stopping them from doing it. But yet they still show up to the studio, yet they're still experimenting. So if there's any potter out there who feels like their work isn't sale ready, just do a sale and then see and do the next sale according to what worked at that sale. We all have to start somewhere.
And in a lot of ways, starting when there's not as many eyeballs on you gives you the space to, fail in an unembarrassing kind of way, right? There's only so much you can learn and figure out before you actually put yourself out in public and test the market and have conversations with people, like when we were talking at the very beginning of this with the handle and mugs. And at a certain point, you've got to put yourself out there, and better to put yourself out there when you're talking to 50 people or 10 people or 100 people than 100,000 people.
Yes, yes. And you hit a really good point there. When I don't have very many followers right now. I don't think about the amount of followers that I have, but there was a point where I only had 300 followers, and it felt very private. It felt very safe at that moment because I knew that I can make this random post and see how people feel about it, see how I feel about it. What does Ricky Blanding look like in public? Or Ricky Blanding ceramics look like in public? And you need that space. It's easy to kind of like discourage yourself when you get more followers and when you do have more eyes on you and you realize like, oh man, I would have done that differently. And you start making all these assumptions about what people think about you, what you need to do next. There's all of these things, all because you were under the hotspot, not because you actually did anything wrong. So, just kind of put things into context. Like that's, again, being honest with yourself. You're at this beginning place and there's benefits to that. Take the benefits, appreciate, have gratitude, have gratitude. Because when you do get those followers, they're going to look back and be like, oh, this person's been doing this for a minute.
And for me, I always kind of circle back to, if I invited that many people to my house, right? I mean, obviously there are robots on Instagram and all of that kind of stuff. But if we're assuming that whatever audience you have are real life people, if I had 300 people show up to my house, it would be a problem. What is the point of growth? What is the goal here? How much growth do you really need to have the life and the lifestyle and the support and the livelihood and the viability that you need? Some of the times we get to talking about growth and followers and whatever, and I think we should change the word followers to humans. We're talking about effectively making friends. I don't have the capacity to go out to dinner with 300 people every single year and have a meaningful conversation with them, let alone 300,000.
Right. And I love your analogy of essentially we're making friends. Having this customer base is more than just like, oh, you bought my pottery, let's keep in touch. It's like, I want to know what you like. I want to know what we have in common. I want to be able to be good to you in that way. I think that's as far as the analogy goes because friendship is not monetary, but there is an exchange in friendship. And, people are going to want to come back because there's a level of trust that you're establishing with them. If I were a customer to your business, are you listening to what I need? Are you attentive? Are you holding yourself accountable and making changes according to my needs as your customer? Are we here? And on Instagram, especially, it's a really special place to be able to communicate that connection. And I believe businesses that go far are especially tuned into that connection, and they respect it. They prioritize it above their own all of their own creative needs. Again, there's that middle ground, but it's high up on the list.
Yeah. And also thinking through, to the point you made earlier, like, what kind of business are you looking to create? Like you were saying, you could go out and get startup capital, and go buy factory space next week if you really wanted to, but then that would be a radically different business that would remove you from that feedback loop that you're currently getting by going to pop-up shops and speaking one-on-one with people and learning exactly how they're interacting with what you're creating, which is invaluable information that, frankly, the Crate and Barrels of the world would pay large amounts of money to learn about their audience.
Yes. So in that way, working with West Elm has really shown me more of what I want out of this. If I were to see my work in West Elm, works that I designed and works that I actually produced, if that was the end result, I feel like the story becomes the next point where I feel like there's more growth to go. I do want my own small batch pottery, but I do want these partnerships with anywhere that's willing to not only present my own work, but kind of like present it in a way that represents me the best way possible. That's what I'm interested in. Yeah, I think that takes some research. What I want is to just be able to sell my works right now and to be able to plug my kiln back up so I can really do what I'm doing. But I know that ultimately my bigger goals and vision for the company will come as I start to get that consistency and as I start to see what's really out there in this industry. Even listening to this podcast, seeing the varying levels of the ceramic community come together and successful in their own right. But Potter does not mean selling at a pop-up all the time. Potter does not mean brick and mortar. Sometimes it just means a really well-established instructor who has a following, and that's enough. So I have fantasies for what I want this to be, but I really can't say until I learn more about the small batch pottery world.
Well, I think as an outsider looking in, I think you were coming at everything with so much depth and gaining so much clarity by staying aware and learning and just sitting in the nuance of things rather than getting caught up on the internet is so refreshing. And I want to respect your time. We could sit here and talk for another couple of hours, but thank you. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see how this is all going to grow. Oh my gosh, it's going to be amazing.
Rebecca, thank you so much for this conversation. I've honestly learned something in our time together right now. And yeah, I look forward to seeing more of the content that you put out. It's really, really helpful to an artist at my space, in my place and time.
Awesome. Well, for people who don't know you yet on Instagram, or wherever you want to send them on the internet, where can they find you? Where's the best place to come?
So for Ricky Blanding Ceramics, definitely go to Ricky Blanding Ceramics on Instagram. On my stories, I'm usually posting moment to moment successes and failures. And you can also see where I'll be popping up next and selling more of my work. You can also DM me there or my email, rickyblandingceramics@gmail.com, to inquire about a commission. As far as Scrap Soils goes, you can visit scrapsoils.com or visit Scrap Soils on Instagram to find out when we're doing our monthly volunteer series, which is at the end of every month, in order to donate and learn more about what our fundraising efforts are and what it means to compost in the city.
And as we've been talking, I've realized I have at least 2 friends just in and outside of Detroit that I am now going to send a message to as soon as we hang up.
Please, yes, send them my way. Yeah, let's do it. We need to get this food waste under control.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Ricky. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rebecca. We'll talk soon.
I love Ricky's approach to balancing both his creative desires alongside what his customers and his market is telling him that they're interested in. Frankly, I think it's one of the most realistic conversations I've had on that topic in a long time. If you enjoyed this conversation as well, be sure to take a screenshot of the episode on whatever podcast app you're listening to, obviously after you wipe the mud off your hands, and share it with friends on Instagram. Tag me at The Maker's Playbook and Ricky at ricky.blanding.ceramics so that we can send a big old thank you your way. This episode was made possible in part by our lovely sponsor, Amico. You may have noticed that Amico isn't taking direct orders on their website currently. And while that may seem like a bad thing, the reason for it is pretty great. For the past 8 months, Amico has been focusing on supplying their distributors first. In other words, they're focusing on making sure your favorite local shops are supported before even their own website. You can easily pick up your favorite glazes like Potter's Choice Honey Flux or Rainforest Celadon on the shelf of your local clay shop and avoid extra shipping costs. Naturally, high demand and supply issues have made it hard to keep stores stocked these days, but Amico is dedicated to supporting your favorite small businesses first, now and in the future. And that, my friends, is putting your money where your values are, which I am all about. If you don't yet have a favorite local shop, you can find an Amico distributor near you by visiting amico.com/dealers. As always, if you're looking for help in taking better photos of your work, whether it be a cell phone or a regular camera, old or new, I'll be sending out our free monthly photo tip newsletter in 2 weeks. And for the next couple of newsletters, I'm focusing on tips to help get those holiday shop update photos done in about half the time. So pop on over to makersplaybook.com/newsletter to sign up for our list and start taking better photos faster. That's all for now. So until next week, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.